Robert Du Bois preacher in, I ain't gonna kid anybody, he was a tremendous ability preacher. I was 7 years old one Sunday night, and he got me so shook up that I went forward, and you can word it any way you want. That's a long time ago now.
So you remember after church one day when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, they, we were still out to Grandpa's in 41. We moved town 44. Grandma was a twin. She had a pair of sisters that were twins and 2 sets of brother twins in that Preston family. And the closest one up the road married Earl Castle, Ivy, and her twin sister was Heidi that married Earl Olds. And so Ivy wasn't a good driver. And so one Sunday we would pick up Ivy and take her to Britain to church. The next Sunday we would go there and Dad would drive their car to church. And all of us kids would get in the back seat of it, you know. And so you just had to laugh at that effect. And the Sunday of Pearl Harbor, we just, and her husband, and why they called him Whiskers, and his name was Earl, never went to church. I don't know that part of this family story. Anyway, we got back to their place, and where Dad would park behind the house and went around there with, he come running out of the house screaming and hollering and waving. He was quite a excitable guy anyway. It told us about Japan bombing Pearl Harbor and all of what was involved in it. And if it hadn't happened that way, I probably wouldn't have remembered it. But took an awful lot of guys paid with their lives in Second World War. I'd have to start, I don't know how to go back. Most of the ones that I knew that went didn't come back. Well, it was after Dad had sold the car when we moved to town one Sunday morning. We're going to church, and what would they been, 3 houses from us, that woman's boy got killed, and he was on display in the front room, and all of us had to go in there and look at him, you know what I mean. How some got sent back so quick, and some they're still talking about finding, and with DNA now they can come up with who they were, so, you know, to me it's, I don't know.
So how old were you when you went to Gull Lake?
Well, I was trying, okay, we went 1 year before Marilyn got polio, and that was in 46, so that would have been 45. The church in Britain rented a huge cottage. It was set up for 2 families, and the church ran the whole thing. So if you was a married couple, you got a bedroom. I was trying to think of the different people. And then there was a big screened-in porch on the one side, and I don't know the directions around the lake there, and the boys were on the first floor with the preacher, and the second floor was the girls on that porch. And okay, Preston Castle, Dean Don, must have been 3 or 4 boys in high school with the preacher, and I was just a little kid. I mean, where the girls and Ma got another, geez, there was 3 screened-in porches on that cottage. Had another, and then they took turns. You would just laugh in the morning, like getting breakfast, frying bacon and eggs, and some guys did it and some women did it, you know, and the table was probably as long as this house with chairs on both sides of the thing. If people had stuff out of the garden, you know, they brought that up to eat, but the last town, Battle Creek, before you get to Gull Lake, they went in this grocery store. There was 3. The only one I can really, the preacher drove the, well, okay, L.V. Clark, they must have drove their car because they wasn't on the bus, and they were in that grocery store because it wasn't a supermarket, but it was way ahead of what we had in our area for grocery stores for that time frame. I mean, it was interesting. There you go.
So, what was like Aunt Marilyn's first symptom or whatever? How did you just know that they took her to the hospital, I guess?
Well, she wasn't feeling good, and that would have been in 46 then, where it was just, evidently Ma and Dad rented the cottage. Grandpa and Grandma, we didn't have a car yet. And I went with Grandpa when he got that 46 Ford, because Margaret, they had a 35 Chevy and she wrecked it and broke her leg. And she went to a church college in New York, Buffalo, New York. One winter was enough for her out there. Of course, she went on crutches.
Jeez.
Grandpa took her on a train to get there. And she wasn't feeling good, and they got a doctor there to the cottage, and they were checking her over, and they found a lump on the back of her neck, which would have been, you know, like if you put your hand back there going up. And the doctor knew right away what the problem was, and they took her to Battle Creek to the hospital then. And folks are hanging around because they had already buried 3 kids. Here the doctors are telling them she ain't gonna be here tomorrow, so that'll make 4 out of all the kids they had, you know. And so they're kinda, you might as well go back to the cottage because it ain't gonna do you no good to stay here. Well, the girls all had bedrooms, and I slept on a porch on an army cot. It'd be just like on the other side of that window there. And when I went to bed that night, I can't tell you how many preachers was in there. My estimation would be 10 or 11. On their knees praying, and when I woke up next morning, everybody was still there. They never got up all night there. They prayed that whole night. So, Ma got them something to eat, and then Ma and Dad went to Battle Creek to the hospital. And when they got there, the doctors and nurses were at the door. They couldn't believe it. She's still alive. And they told them what the preachers done that night. They just shook their head. They couldn't believe that they said that nobody had ever lived. She was the first one in the state of Michigan that ever had polio that affected the brain that lived. And doctors were, and our week was running out on the cottage, and we was gonna have to go back home. And, you know, I didn't wanna leave Maryland. And the head nurse heard him talking, and she had an extra bedroom. And she come up and told Mom and Dad that Ma was welcome to stay with her. She was in 6 weeks in Battle Creek. So for 6 Saturdays, somebody in the Baptist church in Milan put a car in our driveway full of gas and back then for Dad to go to Battle Creek, and he'd stay all night Friday night and come back Saturday. So if somebody gave you their car to go someplace, then you had to walk, is the bottom line, you know. People don't realize the car thing is a different story today. I mean, there was no used car lots. The car dealers never had any used cars. And they had, Dad ordered in 1946 a new Ford car, and he got it in 1950. 4 years. And then in 1950, I'm in high school, in our shop class, teachers said, we're gonna have a field day. We're going to Detroit to the Rouge plant and tour that. We get down to the Rouge plant after school started in 1950 in the fall. They're making the 51 Ford cars already. So I come back home and told Dad he bought a used car. And the new ones now are 51. So it was kind of hilarious how, but we, after Marilyn come back, she missed 1 semester of school in the 8th grade. And you know, how do you say, talking about the school, well, she ends up, she graduates 4th in her class, she gets a scholarship, goes to from Henry Ford Hospital, and I thought that because Dad worked the Fords, that was how it came, but I found out later that wasn't. She filled out some application for it and qualified that way. So to me, nobody will ever know or understand what she did for people in the hospital that was having health problems, for what she had been through in her life. I mean, there's no nice way of saying it. But, so, on the car thing to get Maryland carted around, you just couldn't find, what do you call it, decent cars, or they're just bought a, well, there's been some discussion with families, and I don't want to talk about that. The first one that I was a 36 or 7 Plymouth. I think we had 2 or 3 days. He gave $200 for it and took it back. It was a piece of junk. And then found a 37 Packard. We probably run that pretty near 2 years. They still had, in the very top of them, they built steel cars, but they still didn't think you could seal steel good enough for a roof in a car. They still had kind of a rubberized canvas thing. And that leaked in the back seat. I call it Maryland's side. I was on the left side, Marilyn was on the right, Joyce and Llewellyn were between us. Karen was in the front seat with mom and dad, you know. And it was rusted out bad enough under, it took Don Mills to tell the story. Mom would cart us around. We started farming with Millses, and Don was a year older than Marilyn. And he told one time about Karen in the back seat, and she's standing on the hump, and there's so much dust coming in, you got the windows open to try and get the dust out of it. But eventually the Ford garage got a 41 Mercury that was a nice car, and we got that. And we had that until that 50 Ford come in then. And that was, 1950 was a good year for basically the Rendell family out of the whole bunch. Lucille and Walt got a, am I getting the years? Yeah. They got a 49 Chevy. Rosenhauer had a 49 Plymouth. Somebody else had a 49. And then Grandma and Grandpa and us and George and Marg, who else was in there, had cars made in 1950. So out of the whole family, everybody got a new car in either 49 or 50. So like at a Christmas or something, boy, we thought we were big shots, you know, man, look at all these new cars here, because we'd been basically in the horse and buggy a couple of years prior to it. But after that, well, no, because Dad and I both got 56 cars, and I had to, I ordered mine. I don't know if he did his or not. But by the middle 50s, you could basically, if you needed a car, you could come up with one. But from the end of the Second World War until the mid-50s, it was something else. People can't understand that today, that vehicles were, what do you say? Well, go.
Yeah, by all means.
Can I just,
No, go, you ain't gonna crawl, come on.
you'll edit that out?
Yeah, that's what I went to school for.
Okay.
In fact, I'm gonna pause the recording. Whoops.